Jiwon Kim couldn't believe what he was holding in his hands. The invitation was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It wasn't made of paper or any material he recognized. Instead, it seemed to shimmer and change colors as he moved it under the light of his small laboratory aboard the research vessel Aurora. The edges of the invitation glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. He read the words again, his eyes widening each time. The Valerian Queen herself had invited him to something called the Sacred Moonrise Ceremony. Jiwon had been studying alien species for over 10 years, but he had never received a personal invitation from any alien ruler, let alone one as mysterious as the Valerian Queen. The invitation had arrived that morning through official diplomatic channels. Commander Hyunwoo Park had personally delivered it to Jiwon's quarters, his usually serious face showing a rare smile. "This is huge, Jiwon," he had said, clapping his friend on the shoulder. "In all my years of space exploration, I've never seen anything like this. The Valerians barely interact with other species, and here they are, inviting one of our crew, members to their most sacred ceremony." Jiwon turned the invitation over in his hands again. The writing was in perfect Korean, which was strange since the Valerians had their own complex language system. How did they know Korean so well? The script flowed like water across the surface, elegant and beautiful, but it was the specific words that made his stomach flutter, with both excitement and nervousness. "Your unique essence calls to us across the stars," the invitation read. "Your perfect compatibility with our sacred traditions makes you the ideal guest for our sacred moonrise ceremony. We have watched your work with great interest and believe you possess qualities that align perfectly with our ancient customs." Dr. Mina Lee had spent the entire afternoon explaining Valerian culture to him. She sat across from him in the ship's library, her notebook filled with hastily scribbled notes and drawings. "The Valerians are fascinating," she explained, pushing her glasses up her nose. "They live in a society ruled entirely by women. The queen is considered almost godlike, and her daughters hold incredible power. Their ceremonies are deeply spiritual events that happen only once every few years." Jiwon listened carefully as Mina continued. "What makes this invitation so special is that they've never invited an outsider before. Ever. Their ceremonies are private sacred events that only their own people can attend. For them to invite you means they see something in you that they've never seen in any other human." The more Jiwon learned about the Valerians, the more curious he became. They were tall, graceful beings with skin that seemed to glow from within. They lived on a planet with 3 moons, and their entire culture revolved around the cycles of these moons. The sacred moonrise ceremony happened when all 3 moons aligned perfectly in their night sky. "But why me?" Jiwon asked Mina during their briefing session. "I'm just a xenobiologist. I study alien plants and simple organisms. I'm not a diplomat or a cultural expert." Mina smiled at him. "Maybe that's exactly why they chose you. Your research, papers on interspecies communication, have been translated into dozens of languages. You have a way of understanding how different species think and interact. Perhaps they see that quality in you." That evening, Jiwon stood at the observation deck of the Aurora, looking out at the stars. Tomorrow, he would board a shuttle to the Valerian homeworld. He felt a mix of excitement and anxiety churning in his stomach. This could be the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to study an alien culture that few humans had ever encountered. But something about the invitation still bothered him. The phrase perfect compatibility kept echoing in his mind. What did that really mean? Jiwon's jaw dropped as the shuttle descended through the clouds of the Valerian homeworld. Nothing could have prepared him for what he was seeing. Massive cities floated in the air, held up by some kind of technology he couldn't even begin to understand. The buildings looked like they were made of crystal and light, spinning slowly as they drifted through the purple and green aurora that painted the entire sky. "This is impossible," he whispered to himself, pressing his face against the shuttle window. The pilot, a friendly Valerian named Kyle, chuckled softly at his reaction. "First time seeing our world?" Kyle asked, in surprisingly good Korean. "Most. Visitors have that same look. We've been building our floating cities for thousands of years. The ground below is sacred to us, so we live in the sky." As they approached the largest floating structure, Jiwon realized it wasn't just a building. It was an entire palace that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Towers stretched impossibly high, connected by bridges that looked like they were made of solidified starlight. Gardens hung in the air around the palace, filled with plants that glowed in colors he had never seen before. The shuttle docked at what looked like a landing platform made of pure crystal. As Ji-won stepped out, he felt lighter than usual. The gravity here was weaker than Earth's. He took a deep breath and the air tasted sweet, almost like honey. A group of Valerian nobles waited for him at the entrance to the palace. Ji-won had seen pictures of Valerians before, but meeting them in person was completely different. They were incredibly tall, at least 8 feet high, with skin that seemed to glow from within like moonlight. Their robes flowed around them as if they were underwater, and when they moved they seemed to glide rather than walk. "Welcome, honored guest," said the lead noble, bowing deeply. "I am Duke Theron. Her Majesty Queen Arya awaits your presence." As they walked through the palace corridors, Ji-won couldn't help but stare at everything around him. The walls seemed alive, pulsing gently with soft light. Artwork floated in the air without any visible support, and the floors felt warm beneath his feet despite looking like solid crystal. They entered a massive hall that took Ji-won's breath away. The ceiling stretched so high he couldn't see the top, and it was filled with what looked like actual stars. Hundreds of Valerians stood in elegant groups throughout the hall, all of them turning to look at him as he entered. Then he saw her. Queen Arya stood at the far end of the hall on a raised platform, and she was the most beautiful and terrifying being Ji-won had ever seen. She was even taller than the other Valerians, with silver hair that seemed to move like liquid mercury. Her skin glowed brighter than the others, and her eyes were like looking into deep space filled with distant stars. What shocked Ji-won most was that she stepped down from her platform and walked directly toward him. Duke Theron whispered urgently in his ear, "This has never happened before. The queen never leaves her throne to greet anyone." Queen Arya stopped in front of Ji-won and smiled. When she spoke, her voice sounded like music. "Welcome to our world. Ji-won Kim, we have waited long for your arrival." Ji-won tried to bow, but his legs felt shaky. "Your Majesty, I'm honored by your invitation." "The honor is ours," she replied, her star-filled eyes studying his face carefully. "You are, exactly, as we hoped you would be." As the welcoming ceremony continued, Ji-won found himself constantly distracted by 3 young Valerian women, standing near the queen's throne. They had to be the queen's daughters. They shared her ethereal beauty, but looked younger and more curious. What made him uncomfortable was how they stared at him. Not in a friendly way, but like scientists studying an interesting specimen. The first princess had long blue hair that seemed to float around her shoulders. The second had golden hair that sparkled like actual gold thread. The third, who looked the youngest, had silver hair like her mother, but with streaks of purple running through it. Throughout the entire ceremony, no matter where Ji-won moved in the hall, he could feel their eyes on him. They whispered to each other and pointed in his direction when they thought he wasn't looking. Their attention made him feel exposed and vulnerable. Something was definitely not normal about this situation. The feast hall was unlike anything Ji-won had ever experienced. Long tables made of what looked like living wood stretched across the room, their surfaces glowing with soft light. The food appeared to be floating above golden plates, and the smells were incredible, some familiar, others completely alien, but somehow appealing to his human senses. Musicians played instruments that Ji-won couldn't even identify. The music didn't just fill his ears, he could feel it vibrating through his chest and bones. It was hypnotic, making him feel relaxed and slightly dizzy at the same time. The other guests swayed gently to the rhythm, their glowing skin pulsing. In time with the beat, Ji-won sat at the high table next to Queen Arya, trying to figure out how to eat the floating food. A Valerian servant noticed his confusion and showed him how to guide the food to his mouth, using gentle hand movements. The taste was amazing, like nothing he had ever experienced on Earth. "Are you enjoying our cuisine?" Queen Arya asked, her musical voice cutting through the hypnotic music. "It's incredible," Ji-won replied honestly. "I've never tasted anything like this. What is it made from?" Ancient recipes passed down through generations, she said with a mysterious smile. Each dish is prepared specifically to enhance the experience of our honored guests. As the evening progressed, Jiwon noticed the three princesses moving closer to his table. The first one, with the flowing blue hair, approached him during the third course. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but something about her smile made him nervous. "I am Princess Nala," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "I hope you don't mind if I ask you some questions about your species. We so rarely get to meet humans in person." Jiwon nodded politely. "Of course, Princess. I'd be happy to help." Her questions started innocently enough. She asked about human biology, how humans adapted to different environments, and what made human bodies so resilient compared to other species. But as she continued talking, her questions became more specific and personal. "How do human muscles work exactly? May I feel how strong your arm is?" she asked, reaching out to touch his bicep before he could respond. Her fingers were cold against his skin, and she squeezed his muscle with surprising strength. "Fascinating," she murmured, her eyes lighting up. "So much denser than I expected." Before Jiwon could move away, the second princess appeared on his other side. Her golden hair sparkled in the light as she sat down uninvited next to him. "I am Princess Vera," she said, studying his face intently. "I'm curious about human emotions. Do you form strong attachments quickly? How do humans choose?" "They're mates." Jiwon felt his cheeks burning. "Well, that's a pretty personal question." "Oh, but we're just interested in cultural differences," Princess Vera said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "For example, do humans respond well to physical touch? Does it create bonding between your species?" Her hand was warm, and she began tracing small circles on his shoulder with her fingers. Jiwon tried to shift away, but she moved closer. The youngest princess, with silver and purple hair, appeared behind his chair. "I am Princess Kira," she said, her voice softer than her sister's. "I've read about human endurance. Is it true that humans can survive in conditions that would kill most other species?" "I suppose we're pretty adaptable," Jiwon said, feeling trapped between the three sisters. Princess Kira leaned down and whispered near his ear, "I've heard human bodies can handle incredible stress. Your heart rate, for instance. May I check your pulse?" Before he could protest, she placed her fingers against his neck. Her touch sent shivers down his spine, and not in a good way. All three princesses were now touching him in some way. One hand on his arm, another on his shoulder, and fingers on his neck. "Your heart is beating so fast," Princess Kira observed with obvious interest. "Is this normal for humans in social situations?" "Actually, it's beating fast because you're making me uncomfortable," Jiwon said, trying to stand up. Princess Nala gently but firmly pressed him back into his seat. "Please don't be alarmed. We're simply fascinated by your species. You're the first human we've been able to study up close." The word study made Jiwon's blood run cold. He looked around the feast hall, hoping to catch Queen Arya's attention, but she was deep in conversation with other nobles and seemed to be deliberately ignoring what her daughters were doing to him. "I think I need some fresh air," Jiwon said, trying again to stand. "Nonsense," Princess Vera said, her grip tightening on his shoulder. "The night is just beginning. We have so many more questions to ask you." The hypnotic music seemed to grow louder, and the floating food began to look less appealing. Jiwon realized with growing horror that he might not be an honored guest at this feast. He might be something else entirely. The feast finally ended after what felt like hours. Jiwon's head was spinning from the strange music and the constant attention from the three princesses. When two Valerian servants approached him with respectful bows, he felt relieved. "Honored guest," one of them said in broken Korean, "we take you to rest place now. Very comfortable for human." Jiwon nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I could really use some sleep after such an eventful day." As they walked through the crystal corridors, Jiwon noticed they were going deeper into the palace rather than toward what looked like guest areas. The walls here were different, thicker with fewer windows, and the glowing light was dimmer. Something felt wrong, but he was too tired and confused to think clearly. "Are you sure this is the right way to the guest quarters?" he asked the servants. They exchanged glances and nodded quickly. Yes, yes. Special room for special guest. Very safe, very private. They stopped in front of a heavy door that looked more like a vault than a bedroom entrance. One servant placed his hand on a crystal panel, and the door slid open with a heavy grinding sound. The room beyond was beautiful, but felt more like a luxury prison cell than guest quarters. The room was circular with no windows. The walls were made of the same glowing crystal as the rest of the palace, but these walls seemed thicker and more solid. There was an elegant bed in the center, floating furniture, and what looked like monitoring equipment disguised as decorative art pieces. "This doesn't look like a normal guest room," Ji-won said, backing toward the door. But the servants had already stepped outside, and the door began closing with that same grinding sound. Ji-won rushed toward it, but it sealed shut with a definitive click. He pressed his hands against the crystal surface and pushed, but it wouldn't budge. "Hey!" he shouted, pounding on the door. "There's been a mistake. Let me out!" No one answered. The room was completely silent except for his own breathing and heartbeat, which was getting faster by the minute. He was examining the walls, looking for another way out when he heard the door opening again. Hope flashed through him until he saw who was entering. All three princesses walked in together, and immediately Ji-won knew he was in serious trouble. Their entire demeanor had changed. Gone were the polite smiles and curious questions. Now they looked at him the way a scientist might look at an interesting lab rat. Princess Nala carried what looked like some kind of electronic device, while Princess Vera held a crystal tablet that was glowing with information. "Finally, we can speak privately," Princess Nala said, her voice no longer musical but cold and calculating. "What's going on here?" Ji-won demanded, backing against the far wall. "I thought I was an honored guest." Princess Kira laughed, a sound that sent chills down his spine. "Honored? Yes, in a way, but not the way you think." Princess Vera looked at her glowing tablet and began reading in heavily accented Korean. Ji-won Kim, age 32, xenobiologist, published 47 research papers on interspecies communication. Physical condition, excellent. Mental resilience, high. Genetic markers, optimal for our purposes. "How do you know all that about me?" Ji-won asked, his voice shaking. "We've been studying your species for years," Princess Nala explained, circling him slowly like a predator. "Your television broadcasts, your internet communications, your scientific journals. Humans are fascinating creatures. So adaptable, so resilient, so compatible with other species." The word compatible made Ji-won's stomach drop. Compatible for what? Princess Kira stepped closer, her silver and purple hair shimmering in the dim light. "We've been watching human mating documentaries, human relationship shows, human romance, movies. Your species forms such interesting bonds with others. We want to understand how that works." "You want to study human relationships?" Ji-won asked, confused and terrified. "Not just study," Princess Vera said with a predatory smile. "Experience, test, experiment." The horrible truth began dawning on Ji-won. He wasn't here as a cultural ambassador or honored guest. He was here as a test subject for whatever twisted experiments these alien princesses had planned. "You can't do this," he said, his voice getting stronger despite his fear. "I'm a citizen of Earth. I have diplomatic protection." Princess Nala laughed again. "Diplomatic protection? You're millions of miles from Earth, in a room that no one knows exists, on a planet where our mother is absolute ruler. No one is coming to save you, human. Besides," Princess Kira added, moving even closer, "we've chosen you specifically because you're perfect for our research. Your psychological profile shows you're curious, adaptable, and resilient. You'll survive our experiments much better than weaker specimens would." Ji-won's mind raced as the full horror of his situation became clear. He wasn't a guest at all. He was a kidnapped research subject, trapped in an alien palace with three beings who saw him as nothing more than an interesting animal to experiment on. He had to find a way out of this nightmare, and he had to do it fast. Ji-won's heart was pounding, but his mind was working faster than it ever had before. Years of studying alien species had taught him one important thing. Every intelligent species had weaknesses, and most of those weaknesses came from their own psychology and social structures. He took a deep breath and forced himself to appear calm. "Wait," he said, holding up his hands as the three princesses moved closer. "You're making a huge mistake." Princess Nala paused, tilting her head curiously. "What kind of mistake?" "For you've been studying human relationships through our entertainment media, right? Movies, TV shows, documentaries?" Jiwon asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes," Princess Vera said impatiently. "We've analyzed thousands of hours of human bonding behaviors." Jiwon shook his head and let out a small laugh. "Those aren't real. Those are just stories we make up for entertainment. Real human bonding is completely different. It's much more complex and requires very specific conditions." Princess Kira frowned. "What do you mean?" "Human bonding isn't something you can just force or study like a simple experiment," Jiwon explained, backing slowly toward the center of the room. "It requires trust, respect, and most importantly, the human has to choose who they want to bond with. Without choice, the bonding process fails completely." The three sisters exchanged glances, and Jiwon could see doubt creeping into their expressions. He pressed his advantage. "In fact," he continued, "humans can only truly bond with one individual at a time. Our brains are wired that way. If multiple people try to force bonding simultaneously, it causes psychological damage that makes any real bonding impossible." Princess Vera looked at her glowing tablet, scrolling through information. "But in your movies, humans often have multiple relationships, entertainment fiction," Jiwon said firmly. "Not real life. Real human bonding requires the human to evaluate potential partners and choose the most compatible one. It's a complex psychological process that can't be rushed." Princess Nala's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And how exactly does this evaluation process work?" Jiwon's mind raced. He needed to buy time and create conflict between the sisters. "Well, humans instinctively look for specific qualities in a bonding partner: intelligence, emotional maturity, leadership ability, physical capability. The human psyche automatically ranks potential partners and will only respond to the most superior individual." He could see the competitive spark igniting in their eyes immediately. As daughters of a queen in a hierarchical society, they were probably constantly competing with each other for status and recognition. "Superior in what ways?" Princess Kira asked, straightening her posture. "Mental strength, wisdom, beauty, power," Jiwon said, watching their reactions carefully. "The human mind can sense these qualities and will naturally gravitate toward whoever possesses them most strongly. It's completely involuntary. We can't control it." Princess Vera stepped forward. "Obviously, as the eldest and most experienced, I would be the natural choice." "Age doesn't always equal superiority," Princess Nala snapped. "I have the most advanced education in xenobiology. Clearly, I would be more compatible with a scientist." Princess Kira moved between her sisters. "Mother always said I inherited the strongest leadership qualities. That's what humans would truly respect." "Perfect." They were already starting to argue. While they bickered, Jiwon began studying the room more carefully. The walls weren't just crystal. They were some kind of bioorganic material that pulsed gently with life. He could see faint patterns of light moving through them like a nervous system. He pulled out his phone, pretending to check the time, but actually activating its various sensors. The electromagnetic radiation from the device caused a subtle change in the wall's pulsing pattern. "Interesting. How would we determine who is most suitable?" Princess Vera was asking. "Well," Jiwon said thoughtfully, "human bonding evaluation requires private, individual assessment. The human needs to spend quality time with each potential partner separately to properly evaluate their compatibility. Rushing the process or doing it in a group setting completely ruins the psychological conditions necessary for bonding." The sisters looked at each other with growing suspicion and competition. "I should go first," Princess Nala declared. "I'm the most scientifically minded." "Absolutely not," Princess Vera shot back. "As the eldest, protocol demands I have the first opportunity." "You're both wrong," Princess Kira said coldly. "Mother specifically chose me to oversee this project." As their argument grew more heated, Jiwon discreetly activated more functions on his phone: the Wi-Fi scanner, Bluetooth, even the flashlight app. Each electronic signal caused the walls to react slightly differently. The bioorganic systems in the room were definitely sensitive to electromagnetic interference. His watch was also emitting signals, and he noticed that the monitoring equipment disguised as art was starting to flicker slightly. The room's living systems were beginning to show signs of confusion from all the electronic noise his devices were creating. "We need to establish a proper evaluation schedule," he said, interrupting their argument. "This can't be done hastily. Human psychology is extremely delicate, and if you damage the bonding process, it becomes impossible to repair." The princesses looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and renewed interest. He had successfully planted the seeds of competition and doubt among them, and his electronic devices were already starting to disrupt the room's systems. Now he just needed to figure out how to use these advantages to escape before they realized what he was really doing. The three princesses were still arguing about who should go first when Ji-won remembered something crucial from his xenobiology training. During the cultural briefing, Dr. Mina Lee had mentioned that Valarian biology was extremely sensitive to certain chemical compounds that were harmless to humans. Ji-won had been carrying a small emergency kit in his jacket pocket, standard equipment for any scientist working in alien environments. Inside were caffeine pills for staying alert during long research sessions and a small flask of alcohol for sterilizing equipment. What Mina had told him suddenly became very important. These substances were like poison to Valarian nervous systems. While the sisters continued their heated debate, Ji-won quietly popped 2 caffeine pills into his mouth and took a small sip from his flask. The bitter taste made him wince, but he forced himself to swallow. Then he began breathing deeply, as if he were doing some kind of meditation exercise. "What are you doing?" Princess Kira asked, noticing his strange behavior. "I'm preparing for the evaluation process," Ji-won said, continuing to breathe heavily. "Human bonding requires the body to produce specific chemical signals. I need to get my biochemistry ready." This was complete nonsense, but the princesses didn't know that. They watched with fascination as he continued his fake breathing exercises, unknowingly releasing caffeine-laced breath into the room's air circulation system. Within minutes, Ji-won noticed the first signs that his plan was working. The walls, which had been pulsing steadily with soft light, began to flicker irregularly. The bioorganic patterns running through the crystal surfaces started moving faster, then slower, like a heart with an irregular rhythm. "Is something wrong with the room?" Princess Vera asked, looking around nervously as the lighting began to dim and brighten randomly. "Not wrong," Ji-won said quickly, wiping sweat from his forehead, sweat that was now full of alcohol and caffeine. "This is exactly what's supposed to happen. The room's biological systems are responding to my human biochemistry. It means the bonding preparation is working." The alcohol was making him sweat more, and every drop that hit the floor was absorbed by the living crystal, spreading the toxic compounds further into the palace's integrated systems. The walls began to pulse more erratically, and some of the disguised monitoring equipment started making strange humming sounds. Princess Nala pulled out her electronic device and frowned at the readings. "The room's vital signs are becoming unstable." "That's perfectly normal," Ji-won lied, trying to look confident while his heart raced. "Human bonding affects the environment around us. Our bodies release pheromones and other chemicals that interact with sensitive biological systems. The more compatible the potential partner, the stronger the reaction." As if on cue, the lights flickered more dramatically, and a section of the wall actually changed color from blue to a sickly yellow-green. Princess Kira stepped back in alarm. Should the walls be doing that? "It means the room is trying to adapt to human presence," Ji-won said, taking another secret sip from his flask while pretending to wipe his mouth. "But the process requires very specific conditions. Too much stimulation from multiple sources can overwhelm the system." The caffeine was now fully in his bloodstream, making his heart race and his breathing faster. This meant he was exhaling even more chemical compounds into the air. The room's biological systems were clearly struggling to process the foreign substances. The floor beneath their feet began to feel slightly warm, and the crystal walls started making soft crackling sounds. One of the floating furniture pieces wobbled and dropped several inches before stabilizing. "This doesn't look normal," Princess Vera said, backing toward the door. "It's not supposed to look normal to you," Ji-won replied, his mind racing as fast as his chemically enhanced heart. Valerian and human biology are completely different. What looks like malfunction to you is actually the room preparing for human bonding. But the process is very delicate. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly, releasing more caffeine-laced air. The human bonding process requires absolute privacy and minimal external interference. Too many people in the space disrupts the chemical balance. That's why I can only evaluate one potential partner at a time, in complete isolation. The monitoring equipment was now making constant beeping sounds, and several wall panels were flickering between different colors, like a broken computer screen. Princess Nala looked at her device again, her expression growing more worried. The bio-readings are completely chaotic. Exactly as they should be, Ji-won said, secretly thrilled that his sabotage was working so well. This is the human bonding preparation phase. The room needs time to fully adapt to my biochemistry before any evaluation can begin safely. The door mechanism started making grinding sounds, as if the electronic systems controlling it were being affected by the spreading chemical contamination. I think we should leave you to prepare, Princess Kira said uncertainly, glancing at her sisters. That would be wise, Ji-won agreed, trying to hide his excitement. The adaptation process works best without outside interference. Once the room fully synchronizes with my human biology, we can begin the proper evaluation process. The three princesses exchanged nervous glances as more systems around the room began malfunctioning. They had no idea that Ji-won was slowly poisoning their entire palace with substances as harmless to him as coffee and rubbing alcohol. The three princesses finally left the room, still arguing about who would get the first chance to evaluate with Ji-won. As soon as the door sealed shut behind them, Ji-won allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. His plan was working better than he had hoped. Within an hour, the effects of his chemical sabotage began spreading beyond his prison cell. The palace's bioorganic systems were all connected, like a massive living organism with blood vessels, running through every wall, floor and ceiling. The caffeine and alcohol in his breath and sweat were now circulating through the entire structure, like a poison in the bloodstream. First, the lights in the corridors outside his room began flickering. Then Ji-won heard confused voices in the distance, servants and guards trying to figure out why their technology was malfunctioning. The organic walls throughout the palace were pulsing irregularly, and the beautiful bioluminescent patterns were becoming chaotic and unpredictable. Emergency lighting suddenly activated throughout the palace, harsh, bright lights that were clearly meant for crisis situations. Through the crystal walls, Ji-won could hear footsteps running back and forth, voices shouting in the Valerian language, and the sound of electronic systems beeping and buzzing as they struggled to function. The fight. Della to his cell was making strange grinding noises. The bioorganic lock mechanism was clearly being affected by the chemical contamination spreading through the palace's systems. Ji-won pressed his ear against the crystal and could hear that the locking mechanism was clicking on and off repeatedly, as if it couldn't decide whether to stay sealed or open. Taking another sip from his flask and popping one more caffeine pill, Ji-won pressed his hands against the door and pushed as hard as he could. His human strength, combined with the malfunctioning lock, was enough. The door slid open with a grinding screech. The corridor outside was in chaos. Emergency lights cast harsh shadows everywhere, and the normally elegant glowing walls were now pulsing with sickly colors. 2 Valerian guards who had been posted outside his door were standing confused, looking at their malfunctioning equipment. They turned when they heard the door open, their tall forms moving toward him with typical Valerian grace. But they were clearly not expecting any real resistance from a smaller human. "Back to room," one guard said in broken Korean, reaching out to grab Ji-won's arm. That was his mistake. Ji-won had grown up playing soccer and had been working out regularly aboard the Aurora to stay in shape. His human reflexes, evolved from millions of years of survival on a dangerous planet, were much faster than these aliens expected. As the guard reached for him, Ji-won grabbed the Valerian's wrist and used his own momentum against him, spinning and throwing the much taller alien into the wall. The guard hit the malfunctioning crystal surface and slumped to the ground, dazed. The second guard moved faster, but Ji-won was ready. He ducked under the alien's long arms and delivered a solid punch to what he hoped was the equivalent of a solar plexus. The Valerian doubled over, gasping in their musical language. Ji-won didn't wait to see if there were more guards coming. He ran down the corridor, following the emergency lighting toward what looked like a maintenance area. Behind him, he could hear alarms starting to sound throughout the palace. The maintenance section was perfect for someone his size. The corridors were much smaller here, designed for repair work, rather than the tall, graceful Valerians. Ji-won had to crouch slightly, but he could move quickly through spaces that would be impossible for his 8-foot-tall captors to navigate. As he crawled through the maintenance tunnels, he could hear the palace's systems failing more dramatically. The organic walls around him were hot to the touch and pulsing rapidly, like a fever. The bioluminescent patterns were completely chaotic now, flashing random colors as the palace's immune system tried desperately to fight off what it perceived as a deadly infection. His human biochemistry was like a virus to these alien systems. Every breath he took, every drop of sweat that fell, was spreading more contamination through the interconnected organic network. The palace was literally treating him like a disease that needed to be eliminated. Through ventilation grates, he could see Valerian technicians running through the main corridors, their normally calm demeanor replaced by panic. Their sophisticated bioorganic technology was failing, and they had no idea how to stop it. Ji-won followed the maintenance tunnels upward, using his knowledge of building design to head toward where communication equipment would likely be located. He needed to get a message to Captain Hyunwoo Park and the Aurora before the Valerians figured out how to contain the damage he was causing. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer, but the narrow tunnels were slowing down his pursuers significantly. His human size, which had made him seem weak and vulnerable to the Valerians, was now his greatest advantage. The palace was dying around him, and he was the infection that was killing it. The maintenance tunnels led Ji-won higher into the palace, toward the communication spires he had seen when he first arrived. His lungs burned from crawling through the narrow spaces, and his clothes were soaked with sweat that continued to poison the organic systems around him. Every surface he touched began to glow with that sickly yellow-green color, showing how his human biochemistry was spreading like wildfire through the palace's living network. As he climbed through a vertical shaft, Ji-won could hear the chaos growing worse below him. Valerian voices echoed through the tunnels, shouting urgent commands in their musical language. Emergency alarms were blaring constantly now, and the palace's bioorganic systems were making sounds he had never heard before, groaning, crackling, and what almost sounded like screaming. He finally reached a maintenance panel that looked out into one of the communication centers. Through the crystal grating, he could see Valerian technicians frantically working at control stations, their normally graceful movements now jerky with panic. The room was filled with floating holographic displays showing the palace's vital systems, and every single one of them was flashing red with warnings. The contamination from his human presence had spread further than he had dared to hope. According to the displays, entire sections of the palace were shutting down as the bioorganic systems tried to protect themselves from what they perceived as a deadly infection. Ji-won waited until most of the technicians rushed out to deal with another emergency, then kicked out the maintenance grating and dropped into the communication center. Only 2 Valerian operators remained, and they were so focused on their malfunctioning equipment that they didn't notice him at first. When they finally saw him, their eyes went wide with terror. They had probably been told that a dangerous biological contamination was loose in the palace, and here was the source of it standing right in front of them. "Stay back," one of them shouted in Korean, backing away from him. "You're the infection. You're killing the palace." "I'm just trying to go home," Ji-won said, moving toward the communication array. "All I want is to contact my ship." The Valerian technicians continued backing away, clearly terrified to get close to him. This worked perfectly for Ji-won's purposes. He sat down at the main communication console and began working with the controls, using his xenobiology training to figure out the alien interface. The system was partially corrupted by the spreading contamination, but it was still functional, enough for his needs. He managed to establish a connection to the Aurora's communication frequency and began transmitting an emergency message. Captain Park, this is G1. He spoke quickly into the transmitter. I'm being held prisoner in the Valerian Palace. This wasn't a cultural exchange. It was a kidnapping. They wanted to use me as a test subject for experiments. The whole invitation was a lie. He could hear boots running in the corridors outside the communication center. His time was running out. Fast. Captain, you need to investigate other humans who have received similar invitations from the Valerians. I don't think I'm the first one they've taken. Look for anyone who's disappeared after being invited to Valerian ceremonies. This is systematic. They're collecting humans for research. The doors to the communication center burst open, and Valerian guards poured in, wearing what looked like protective suits to shield themselves from his contaminating presence. Behind them came the three princesses, their beautiful faces twisted with rage and fear. "You've destroyed our home," Princess Nala screamed at him. "The palace is dying because of you." "Then let me leave," G1 said, still holding the transmitter. "Call off your experiments. Release any other humans you're holding and I'll go peacefully." "Impossible," Princess Vera snarled. "You know too much about our operations now. You can never be allowed to leave." The guards began moving toward him, but they were moving slowly and carefully, clearly afraid of getting too close to his contaminating human biochemistry. This gave G1 just enough time to send one final message. "Captain Park, I'm in the main communication spire of the Royal Palace. If you don't hear from me again, assume I'm dead and warn Earth about the Valerian research program. They're not the peaceful species we thought they were." Just as the guards reached him, alarms throughout the palace suddenly changed their tone. Instead of the contamination warnings, they were now blaring with a different kind of emergency. Incoming ships detected in orbit. Through the crystal windows of the communication center, G1 could see lights moving across the night sky. The Aurora had arrived, and it wasn't alone. Several other Earth ships were visible, suggesting that Captain Park had contacted the authorities and launched a full rescue operation. Princess Kira looked at the displays showing the approaching human fleet, her face pale with fear. "How did they find us so quickly?" "Because they were probably already looking for the other humans you've kidnapped," G1 said with grim satisfaction. "How many others have you taken over the years? How many humans have disappeared after accepting your fake cultural invitations?" The expression on the princesses' faces told him everything he needed to know. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't have been the last if his plan hadn't worked. The palace was dying around them, human ships were approaching, and the Valerians' secret was finally exposed. The rescue ships arrived faster than anyone expected. Captain Hyunwoo Park had received G1's distress signal and immediately contacted Earth Command, who launched a full investigation. What they discovered was far worse than anyone had imagined. As human marines stormed through the dying palace, they found hidden chambers throughout the complex. In the lower levels, behind walls that looked like decorative crystal panels, they discovered holding cells similar to the one where G1 had been trapped. Most were empty now, but the evidence of recent occupation was clear. Personal belongings from humans, scratch marks on the walls, and bioorganic monitoring equipment designed to study human physiology. The most shocking discovery came when they found the palace's research archives. Dr. Mina Lee, who had accompanied the rescue mission, stood in horror as she translated the Valerian records on her portable computer. "Captain," she said, her voice shaking, "they've been doing this for over 20 years. According to these files, they've taken at least 43 humans from different colonies across the galaxy." Captain Park's face went dark with anger. "Where are they now?" "Some were returned after the experiments were completed," Mina said carefully, not wanting to go into the disturbing details. "Others were kept for long-term study. A few managed to escape on their own over the years, but the Valerians made sure no one believed their stories." Meanwhile, G1 was being treated by the ship's medical team for the effects of the caffeine and alcohol he had used to poison the palace systems. The irony wasn't lost on him. Substances that were toxic to the Valerians had barely affected his human physiology at all. Queen Arya was brought before a hastily assembled galactic tribunal, her usual ethereal beauty now marred by desperation. She sat in chains made of energy fields, her 3 daughters beside her, as representatives from multiple worlds gathered to hear the evidence. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," Queen Arya insisted, her musical voice now sounding hollow and false. "We have always honored our guests. These humans were invited to participate in cultural exchanges." "Cultural exchanges?" Captain Park stood up, holding a data pad filled with evidence. "Your own research files describe humans as fascinating specimens and ideal subjects for compatibility testing. You have detailed biological data on every human you've kidnapped, including their genetic profiles and psychological evaluations." Queen's composure cracked slightly. "We were simply curious about human adaptability. We meant no harm." "Tell that to Dongyun Choi from the Kepler colony," Dr. Mina Lee said, reading from her own files. "He was invited to a sacred ceremony 3 years ago and returned home with severe psychological trauma and no memory of what happened to him. Or Seungmin Yoon from Mars Station, who disappeared after accepting a Valarian cultural invitation and was found 6 months later wandering in space with his mind completely broken. One by one, the evidence mounted. The Valarians had been systematically targeting humans across the galaxy, using their reputation as a peaceful, spiritual species to lure victims. They studied human resilience, adaptability, and psychological responses through experiments that ranged from merely invasive to utterly horrifying. Princess Nala tried to defend their actions. "Humans are remarkably resilient creatures. They survive things that would kill most species. We needed to understand how." "By torturing them," Jiwon interrupted from his seat in the witness area. "By treating them like laboratory animals instead of intelligent beings with rights." The tribunal's judgment was swift and harsh. The Valerian royal family was stripped of their authority, and their planet was placed under galactic supervision. More importantly, new protocols were established for all first contact situations and cultural exchanges. The Jiwon protocols, as they became known throughout the galaxy, required multiple safeguards for any interspecies diplomatic contact. No single individual could be invited to an alien world without proper oversight. All cultural ceremonies involving other species had to be monitored by neutral observers, and any species found to be conducting unauthorized experiments on intelligent beings would face immediate sanctions. But the most significant impact of Jiwon's ordeal was how it changed the galaxy's perception of humanity. For years, humans had been seen as a relatively weak species, smaller and less physically impressive than most aliens, with no special abilities or advanced technology. Jiwon's escape changed that perception completely. Using nothing but common, human substances like caffeine and alcohol, he had brought down an entire alien palace. His quick thinking, adaptability, and refusal to accept his fate as a victim had exposed a criminal operation that had been running for decades. Ambassador Taehyung Lim, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, addressed the assembly after the tribunal ended. "This incident proves that humans should never be underestimated. We may not be the strongest or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but we have something that makes us dangerous to those who would exploit us. We never give up. We adapt to any situation and we turn our weaknesses into strengths." The Valerian research files were distributed to every world in the galaxy as a warning. They showed in disturbing detail how the aliens had tried to break human spirits, study human resilience, and exploit human psychology. But they also showed how, in every case, the humans had fought back in ways the Valerians never expected. Jiwon returned to his work aboard the Aurora, but now his research focused on developing better protection for humans in alien environments. His experience had taught him that the galaxy was full of species who saw humans as interesting subjects rather than equals. The universe had learned an important lesson. Humans might seem unremarkable, but they were survivors who could turn any situation to their advantage. And anyone who tried to exploit that adaptability would discover just how dangerous an underestimated human could be.